everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Adoptions from the Heart TV. I'm your host, Amanda Aliberti. Today, we're going to be sitting down with Deborah Spivack, an attorney who provides legal services to the adopted parents that we work with. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you.
So can you start by sharing with our audience exactly what role you play with Adoptions from the Heart?
Certainly. Thanks for having me. As mentioned, I am an attorney in private practice, and when I work on Adoptions from the Heart cases, it's usually in one of two capacities. One would be pursuing termination of parental rights of the biological parents. Typically, when I do that, when I perform that role, it's on behalf of the agency, who is the moving party in that aspect of the case. I'm licensed in 3 states. Primarily, I work on your cases in parts of Pennsylvania as well as Delaware.
And how many years would you say it's been since you have connected with Adoptions from the Heart and have been working with a lot of the clients that we serve?
Probably 15 or so.
Wow, 15 years. I want our audience to better understand the connection we have, because we collaborate all the time. I mean, we're in moments where we get phone calls from interested clients about adoption, specifically birth parent situations, and we know that we can immediately reach out to Debbie just to gain a little bit more insight as to what we should be doing as an agency, so we're doing everything in accordance with the law. Can you speak on that a little bit, of just the relationship we have and how you do speak with a lot of staff members at the agency routinely?
When a birth parent makes that call to the agency and seeks adoption services, there's usually a complicated backstory of some kind. And depending on her life circumstances and her goals, there might be some complicated legal issues that arise from that backstory. And sometimes we need to talk through how to work through those issues. For instance, if there is an unknown birth parent, or if the birth parent is, the birth father is, say, in jail, or there's an abuse situation, that's something that we typically talk through and determine whether the case is viable and how to move ahead if it is.
Sure. And I think it's important for our audience to recognize that, because building your family through adoption is very encompassing, and you want to make sure whatever route you take, you're doing everything in the accordance of the law that you're being placed through that state, right? So I think that AFTH is very much a proponent of making sure we do everything to serve the client, but also what the law allows us to do. And Debbie Spivack is an important piece to that, for sure. Can you talk a little bit about where the court system is today in adoption with COVID? We get a lot of phone calls from folks who are interested in adoption services and how COVID has affected the clients that we work with.
So I think initially when COVID hit in early 2020, the courts were sort of in a state of trying to figure out how to manage it. And what happened is a lot of courts adapted very quickly, probably because of Zoom. And we realized that a lot of things could be accomplished without physically being present in the courtroom. A lot could happen, and could happen effectively over Zoom. So one of the positive outcomes that I have seen is that Zoom has become much more commonplace and accepted for non-contested hearings. It did also slow things down for quite a while. It took a little bit longer to get hearing dates. Sometimes you would get a hearing date and somebody would come down with COVID and couldn't attend the hearing date. But ultimately, the timelines seem to be going back to what they were pre-pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely would agree that Zoom has drastically affected the way we operate. For us as social workers, Zoom almost hurt us, because the everyday one-on-one services that we were providing our clients changed, right? To not be able to hug your client when they're suffering, or just provide that close contact was really challenging. But I know for the court system, it actually made things easier, because we were all able to operate from home, and it made things go a little bit smoother.
Yeah, it's been, I would say, the Zoom process has made things somewhat easier. on my end. It can be a little bit harder when it comes to things that involve evidence and
Sure.
presenting documents.
Sure.
You have to be pretty handy with the Zoom platform. But all in all, I do think it's managed to expedite processes at some points and also made things a little bit easier on adoptive families as well, who don't have to go to court and bring all of their family members to the finalization.
Absolutely. That's good to hear. Kind of switching gears a little bit, can you share with our audience what your perception has been over the last 15 years and where you think our agency is today in terms of the supportive services that we provide, specifically expecting and birth parents?
Yes. So I believe Adoptions from the Heart has always done a lot to value birth parents early on and to try to provide them with even-handed counseling, not to convince them to place their child, but rather to listen to them and help them make a plan that is compatible with their goals and their resources. And I think that's a nice trait that the agency does have. You separately staff adoptive parents from the birth parent counselors. And I believe that adds a nice division so that both of them have sort of an advocate and that there is that separation. And ultimately, I do believe the birth parents benefit from having the chance to talk through all the options and alternatives to adoption prior to making that very important decision. And more recently, the post-adoption services that Adoptions from the Heart has provided have really been very unique and helpful to birth parents. It's not a process that just ends at placement for the birth parents. It's an ongoing process as they move on with their life, as the child gets older, sometimes as they navigate open adoption relationships. And having the support group that you personally, Amanda, have done for these birth parents, I think has been really great for them in terms of their long-term healing and ability to move forward and process the event that they went through.
What value does that have on the adoptive parent or even the adoptee as he or she grows up? How do you see value in that from their side of things?
My perception, I'm not a counselor, I'm an attorney, but my perception is that having a birth parents, giving them an opportunity to really participate in counseling, in making decisions, in feeling like their voice is heard as part of the placement process, and getting the respect that they do receive through having an individual counselor and direct services makes the placement more solid. It helps them to have closure about the decision they made. They feel that they were an active role rather than just following a procedure.
Sure.
And that they were supported. And ultimately, I think it makes for a better relationship with the adoptive parents going forward as well, and the child. So everybody can move forward in a way that they just felt they were a meaningful part of the process.
Sure. Well, and I think one of the goals we have here at the agency is to provide these wraparound services to help the full picture of what we're all trying to accomplish together, right? Taking that a step further, how do you feel like the court system or even maybe specific judges have reacted to that? Do you feel like they look at us as an agency differently? Like, are we not just a placing agency anymore? Like, how do you feel like judges have reacted, if you've heard any reactions from them of some of the supportive services we're trying to provide our clients?
I don't have the opportunity to discuss or to really hear judges weigh in on that issue very often. But the few judges that have, as part of testimony, been able to learn about the services provided prior to placement and then after placement and the ongoing nature of those services, I think it just demonstrates that Adoptions from the Heart is committed to helping these women in the long term, and it's not just the placement relationship that's important. I think that it just makes the judges respect the work that you're doing even more so, and they know that it's even-handed as a result of that.
Sure.
The judges that have had the opportunity to learn about it, that is.
Right. Sure, and I'm sure it's challenging, right? Because we're kind of in different spaces, and it's very it's always been a struggle for us to connect and have them understand the work that we really do. As I'm sure it's difficult for us to understand the position that they're in when they're making those legal decisions, right? But I do think in the few moments that we've had that opportunity, it's nice to connect that way, right? And to really understand both sides of things. And a judge who takes a few extra moments to really share their reaction to the work that we're doing, or for us to understand a little bit more about the positions that they have in the work that we're all trying to accomplish together, is very rewarding.
I also think some of these judges have a bigger picture than we are even aware of.
Sure.
They might have been working on earlier cases, perhaps with the same mom, kids were in foster care, and they can see from a high level overview the different direction that the children that went through the private adoption process are experiencing in the home that they're in, compared to maybe some of the back and forth that they had in the foster care system.
Sure.
And so I think that they can perceive and see the advantage to private adoption if they have that larger picture of history with that birth parent.
Sure. Well, and you can tell by the questions that they ask too sometimes, right? And I appreciate that curiosity, because some of them really are trying to understand the private route and what type of families we work with, what type of services we have. The concept of open adoption is still somewhat taboo, and discussing that and what services we provide to help build those relationships between biological family and adoptive family and child down the line, I think can still be surprising for some judges.
Well, I don't think a lot of people, including sometimes judges, really understand where the private agency process fits into the overall child protective system. I view that private agencies as filling a kind of an important gap in the child welfare system. The children that are removed from homes due to abuse or neglect, the birth parents in those situations aren't given any choices. And sometimes they don't feel that their voice is heard, that they can trust the people that are coming to their home to follow up on things that they're supposed to be doing. And ultimately it can lead to kind of a negative interaction and a negative relationship. And the birth parent might never really feel empowered or comfortable enough to say, I just don't think I can do it. I just don't think that I can find a home and get a job and balance the budget as I need to. And I'd like to find a family that's better able to meet the needs of this child. But even if they feel that way, they I don't believe feel always comfortable in saying that to their foster care worker.
Sure.
And private adoption allows a different direction for birth parents that feel like they would like to have their child find permanency quickly, and birth parents don't feel like they can meet the goals that the state is setting for them.
Sure.
So it enables them to have their own counselor, usually a social worker with a degree in social work, sometimes a master's in social work, who really understands where they're coming from and can help them make a really safe and legal plan with a pre-approved family that's fully committed to whatever that child's background is. It's a pretty remarkable gap, I believe, that agencies fill in the child welfare system that often is not understood and given sometimes the respect that it should have.
Well, and that moment of that woman feeling empowered enough that she can make that choice is a really important moment, not just for her, but also in turn for the adoptive family who may be placed with her child. And when we're trying to explain the differences in private adoption, that's one of the things we talk about, because once you have that mentality, it changes the game in full, right? Because if she's able to make that choice on her own, she's able to pick the family, she's able to create whatever open adoption she wants down the line. That drastically affects how she's going to respond to this. And then it allows the adoptive family to feel secure knowing that this is truly what he or she wanted for their child. And that's a big piece to the work that we do.
Yes, and I believe the research has shown that the length of time for permanency from children has shrank tremendously in cases that are rooted to a private agency adoption setting. And it also builds in all the same protections that the child welfare system has. The families have a home study, they have clearances. They're often interviewed extensively about the kinds of factors that the child might bring to their home before they're even matched, whether they're open to an open relationship with birth parent. They can fine-tune the adoptive families that would be the best fit for this child and give the mother some really good choices as to what would be the best thing for her child. And I think it's very empowering.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you and the work that you do for our community. I'm happy everybody has the opportunity to understand the legal side of things. We know we can't operate without you, and I think having that connection is really important to the work that we're trying to accomplish as a whole. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Continue to tune in to AFTHtv, and thanks for joining us.